They buried their husbands on Monday. By Friday, they were raising walls, 3 pregnant widows with nothing but grief, grit, and a piece of land nobody wanted.
I've been working these lands for near 60 years now, and I've seen things that would make a grown man weep and others that would make him fall to his knees in prayer.
But there ain't nothing I ever witnessed that matched what happened in the spring of 1892, out on the edge of what folks called the Broken Mesa Territory.
Now you gotta understand something about the West back then. It weren't no place for the faint of heart. The land itself seemed to fight against
Every living soul that dared to settle upon it. Wind could cut through you like a knife made of ice, and the sun could bake a man's brain right inside his skull. But the people who stayed, who planted their boots in that red dirt and refused to move, they were made of something different, something harder than iron and softer than a morning prayer, all wrapped up together. I was running about 200 head of cattle back in those days, working a spread about 15 miles south of the old Miller Creek trading post. My wife, God rest her soul, had passed the winter before, and I was living alone in a house that felt too big and too quiet. That loneliness, it does something to a man, makes him pay attention to things he might otherwise miss. It was a Tuesday morning when I first saw them, 3 women, walking along the old wagon trail that wound through my property. Now, seeing travelers weren't unusual, but these 3 caught my eye for reasons that became clear real quick. Each one of them was heavy with child, their bellies round beneath worn cotton dresses. They walked slow and careful, the way women in their condition tend to move, like they was carrying something precious that might break if they stepped wrong. I rode out to meet them, my old mare Bessie picking her way through the sagebrush. As I got closer, I could see the exhaustion written plain on their faces. Their shoes were near worn through, and their belongings amounted to nothing more than 3 small bundles tied up with rope. The eldest of the 3, a woman with hair the color of autumn wheat and eyes that had seen too much hardship, she stepped forward and spoke first. "We don't mean no trouble, mister. We're just passing through." Her name was Clara, I would come to learn. She was maybe 30 years old, though the hard living made her look older. Walking beside her was Mary, a dark-haired woman of perhaps 25, quiet as a church mouse, but with hands that never stopped moving, always fidgeting with her dress or her bundle. The youngest was Sarah, barely 19 if she was a day, with freckles across her nose and a stubborn set to her jaw that reminded me of my own daughter who had gone east to marry a banker. I asked them where they was headed, and Clara told me a story that broke my heart right there in the saddle. Their husbands had all been killed in a mining accident up in Colorado Territory. The 3 families had been working the same claim, living in adjacent cabins, dreaming of striking it rich the way so many men did in those days. But the mountain had other plans. A tunnel collapse took all 3 men in a single terrible moment, leaving their wives widowed and their unborn children fatherless. The mining company had given them nothing, not a cent, not a word of sympathy, just orders to vacate the company housing within the week. With nowhere else to go and no family to take them in, the 3 women had decided to head south, toward Texas, where Clara had heard tell of a cousin who might offer them shelter. But Texas was still 200 miles away, and these women were in no condition to make such a journey. I could see it plain as day. Mary's ankles were swollen something terrible, and Sarah kept pressing her hand against her lower back like it pained her fierce. Clara tried to hide it, but she was breathing heavy just from the short walk to meet me. I told them to follow me back to my homestead. They could rest there, get some food in their bellies, and figure out their next move. Clara started to protest, saying they didn't want charity, but I held up my hand and told her it weren't charity. It was just being a decent human being, something that seemed in short supply those days. That first night sitting around my kitchen table, I listened to them talk about their husbands, their hopes, their fears for the little ones growing inside them. Mary spoke more than I expected, her voice soft but steady as she described the life she had imagined before everything fell apart. Sarah cried some, which seemed right and proper for someone so young facing such a mountain of uncertainty. Clara held them both together, her strength a visible thing like armor made of pure will. Come morning, Clara made an announcement. They wouldn't be going to Texas. They had talked it through during the night and decided they was tired of running, tired of depending on the kindness of relatives who might or might not want them. They was going to build something of their own. Now, I thought maybe the woman had lost her mind. 3 pregnant women building a homestead? It seemed like a notion born of desperation rather than reason. But Clara had that look in her eye, the same look I'd seen in the eyes of every successful rancher and farmer I'd ever known. It was the look of someone who had made a decision and would not be moved from it. There was a piece of land about 5 miles east of my spread that nobody had claimed. It sat in a little valley with a creek running through it and some natural windbreaks formed by low hills on 3 sides. Good land, I had always thought, just waiting for someone to come along and make something of it. I told them about it, and the next day we rode out there together, watching those 3 women walk that property, pointing at this and that, discussing where a house might go and where a garden could be planted. I felt something stir in my chest that I hadn't felt in a long while. Hope, maybe. Or maybe just the simple pleasure of watching people refuse to be beaten down by a world that seemed determined to crush them. They filed a claim that very week, and then the real work began. I helped where I could, and so did some of the other ranchers and farmers in the area, once word spread about what these 3 women was attempting. But make no mistake, it was Clara, Mary, and Sarah who did the bulk of the labor. They worked from dawn until dusk, moving slower than most workers on account of their condition, but never stopping, never complaining. They started with a simple shelter, just 4 walls and a roof to keep out the rain and wind. I watched Clara swing a hammer with the same determination I'd seen in men half her age. Mary developed a talent for cutting and fitting lumber that surprised everyone, including herself. Sarah, despite being the youngest and the furthest along in her pregnancy, insisted on doing her share, hauling water and mixing the clay that would fill the gaps between the logs. The other women in the territory started coming around to help. Mrs. Patterson brought food and stayed to hold boards in place while they was nailed down. The widow Jenkins, who had raised 6 children on her own after her husband died of fever, came by to offer advice born of hard experience. Even old Mrs. Whitmore, who hadn't left her own property in near a decade, made the journey to contribute quilts and blankets. Something was happening, something bigger than just a shelter being built. A community was forming around these 3 women, drawn together by their courage and their refusal to give up. The shelter was finished in early summer, just 3 weeks before Mary gave birth to a healthy baby boy she named Thomas, after her late husband. 2 weeks later, Sarah brought a little girl into the world, naming her Hope for reasons that seemed too obvious to need explaining. Clara was last, delivering twin boys on a hot August night while a thunderstorm raged outside. She named them Jacob and James, after her husband and her father. I remember standing outside that shelter the morning after Clara's boys was born, watching the sun come up over the hills. The building wasn't much to look at, truth be told. The walls were a bit crooked, and the roof had a slight sag on one side. But it was standing, it was solid, and inside, 3 women and 4 newborn babies were sleeping safe and warm. Over the years that followed, I watched that little homestead grow. The women added rooms to the shelter, then built a proper barn, then fenced in pastures for the goats and chickens they acquired. They planted orchards and gardens, raised their children, and proved every doubter wrong. I lived long enough to see those children grow up strong and capable. Thomas became a doctor who served 3 counties. Hope married a good man and had children of her own. Jacob and James took over the homestead and expanded it until it became one of the finest ranches in the territory. But what I remember most, what I carry with me still in these final days of my own long life, is the image of those 3 women working together in the summer heat, their bellies round with life, their hands raw from labor, their set with determination. They built more than a shelter that summer. They built a testament to what the human spirit can accomplish when it refuses to surrender. The West was won by men with guns and grand ambitions, or so the stories say. But I know different. The West was won by women like Clara, Mary, and Sarah. Women who built homes out of nothing but hope and hard work. Women who raised children in a land that offered no mercy. Women who looked at an impossible situation and decided to make it possible anyway. This old rancher has seen a lot in his time. But I ain't never seen nothing braver than those 3 pregnant women, building their shelter against a world that expected them to fail. And that, my friends, is the honest truth.